Grab your popcorn, find your seats, and get ready, because this episode of the Cinema Spotlight is about to begin. Subscribe if you're new, and please, enjoy the show. Hello everybody, and welcome to the Cinema Spotlight. This is the show where we dissect all things movies, TV, and everything in between. I am your host and self-proclaimed media expert, James Sena. I promise we will have guests on for upcoming episodes, but today I'm once again riding solo. You know the song. I'm improvising most of the show today because I am on a time crunch, to be honest with you. So will I be coherent? Maybe, maybe not, but we're going to find out, and we're just going to roll with the punches and see what happens. In today's episode, we're starting off with another Oscar watch, followed by a segment of So I Was Thinking. And we'll close out the episode with a focus on a question that I received during last episode's Q&A. Here is an official spoiler warning for all content discussed here today, and if you wish to skip around to avoid spoilers, you can find timestamps in the description both on YouTube and Spotify for your convenience. That said, let's shine a spotlight on Knock at the Cabin.
Oscar watch. Oscar watch.
So, Knock at the Cabin came out in theaters quite some time ago. It was all the way back in March. And why am I covering this movie today? Well, I made a little list for myself of movies that I felt are worth a discussion on the Oscar watch. So I jotted them down and I basically just randomly picked one. I said, you know what? I've been interested about this movie for a while. It's been a while since I've watched an M. Night Shyamalan movie. And especially recently we had a conversation about auteur and how different directors operate. Now, there was a little bit of a misunderstanding on my part of what M. Night Shyamalan does and what he's known for. And I think after watching this movie, I actually got a better understanding of how he operates as a director and the types of stories he likes to tell. So we're going to get into that. But first, going into this movie, what did I know? I knew that it had something to do with the apocalypse. I knew that it is horror, thriller, mystery, PG-13 rating, which I don't think actually matters. Some people think that if the horror film is PG-13, it's censoring itself, so therefore it's bad. In this case, I actually don't think the movie would have benefited from seeing a little bit more gore. I don't think that there would have been a point to that. So I'm actually in agreement with the decision to make it PG-13. Did I like the movie? I can give you a blanket yes or no right now. I think I tend to lean more with a no. And it's not that I didn't like it at all. I think, it's tough. Because I would say yes, except for, would I recommend it to someone? Not really. We can talk about it today and why that's the case. But I just want to go into it saying that I had somewhat high expectations for this because I liked the cast. I thought the concept was cool. But something about the execution just didn't really succeed, in my opinion. So let's just jump into some of the notes that I took during the movie. Normally, I like to do the Oscar watch a lot more bullet pointed and structured. With The Sound of Freedom, I had a lot of time to really think and ponder it and come up with specific talking points. This movie, not so much. That's not going to be the case. It's going to be me just sort of thinking about things off the top of my head. So, let's just jump right into this movie. The director is M. Night Shyamalan, as we've already kind of talked about. And there was an interesting cast, and I would go out on a limb and say Dave Bautista is probably the lead in this movie, playing Leonard. And I actually thought he did a very interesting job, and we'll talk about him more later in the episode. But I'm trying to think off the top of my head some other names. Rupert Grint didn't have who plays Ron Weasley. That's what he's known for. He had a supporting role in this movie. I actually thought he did really well. I thought a lot of the cast did a really good job. Jonathan Groff gave a very heartfelt performance. I'll go right. This is the Oscar watch. Do any of these performances in this movie prove to be Oscar worthy? No. I don't think that they were bad. I just don't think that they were Oscar worthy. I think that you're probably going to end up finding Oscar nominations from dramas this year. There are a lot of dramas to pick from, so that is what it is. But something I want to say about this movie for sure is that I loved that even though it's horror and thriller, it was very intentional to never have any jump scares or anything like that, because what a jump scare accomplishes is it makes certain people more, I guess, just scarier, just scarier in general moving forward in the plot. If someone jump scares you, more often than not, they're not exactly a good guy, probably, you know? In this movie, they do a very good job to make you feel very comfortable with these people who realistically should be scary, but they're not. It ends up being the people who are, well, let's get into spoiler territory, shall we? If you haven't seen this movie, it's been out. It's been in theaters and it's out now, so I'm gonna have at it. The general concept of this is there are 4 people who show up to this cabin, and there's a little girl and who has 2 dads that adopted this little girl, and that's actually interestingly enough a very, very big part of the characters, is that this is a same-sex couple. And I think it's because one of the characters is religious, and there are a lot of religious undertones in this movie, and the fact that the girl is adopted, I think definitely adds another level. And I think that this was all done intentionally for the final act, which again for me ended up kind of falling a little bit flat. Not the worst ending of a movie I've ever seen, but it just was a little anticlimactic, or it felt that way to me. But these 4 people come up, they are strangers, and they are essentially the harbingers of, or the 4 horsemen. They're the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, basically. But they're actual people. They're not godly beings or anything like that. They just come, and they're absolutely human, and they don't know really any more that's going on aside from, from the people that are living in the cabin currently. And I like that, because this movie does a very good job of not framing these individuals as villains. They never really frame it that way. They always frame it like they are all just in this one situation that's just very unfortunate and very scary. And again, spoilers, when each of the 4 horsemen essentially die and are killed, you feel bad for each and every one of them. And I like that about this movie. It doesn't have a villain. And I think that this is an example of a movie that takes the idea of there's no villain and actually does a good job with that. My issues with the movie is not about that at all, and I love that intention. Let's go into some other stuff. So, this movie, in my opinion, was not scary. And I think that the only reason why this is an issue is because on different sources that I look to find what genre this movie is, I've seen 3 that come up: horror, thriller, and mystery. Is it a mystery? It's not really a mystery. I don't think that, I wouldn't consider it a mystery, personally. Would I consider it horror? No. Would I consider it a thriller? Sure. I would say it's a thriller. It's definitely a very toned down thriller, but it's a thriller. But it's not scary ever. It's really not. I think that this is more than not a what's not a post-apocalyptic. What is it? It's a disaster film. So, and that's what it feels like to me. And I think this movie, thankfully, is only like an hour and a half. Or an hour, yeah. It's less than 2 hours, which is good, because I think if this movie was any longer than that, I would have really been docking points. This movie was about as short as a movie can be for a feature film, which I think is good, because I think this movie realistically could have been a short film. I think that there's a lot of aspects about this film that really feels like the pacing is just off. And if a movie feels slow and it's this short of a movie, then that's not a good thing. There doesn't have to be action for it to be entertaining. I think that there is a lot of suspense is taken away because we already sort of know what's going to happen. And my biggest gripe with this movie And I'm gonna give this movie, I haven't thought of a rating actually before recording. What would I rate this movie? I've given some, I might give this a 6.4. That feels about right. And here's why. Because it's above good. I think it's a good movie, but it's not, it doesn't do anything particularly, but it doesn't blow me away in any area, which I think is sort of a gripe. But I think if we go back to what is my biggest gripe with this movie, I feel like it ends up being too predictable. And I'm actually going to use this to segue into what is M. Night Shyamalan known for. He's known for plot twists. I would challenge that. I don't know if he should be known for plot twists, because I'm noticing a trend with his movies. There was a movie called Old or something like that, and I believe that movie, you sort of knew what was happening, and it's less of it's a plot twist, and more of you're understanding what is probably going to happen, and you're finding out how it gets to that point. So I think, granted, I'll say this now, and you can give me all the hate you want. I have not seen Shawshank Redemption yet. That is one of the most widely known movies that I have to just definitely watch, and it's M. Night Shyamalan. And I've heard that it's plot twist. Hey folks, this is post-commentary James coming at you with a little correction. At this point in the episode, as I'm listening to it back, as I'm editing, I realized that I made a very just wrong statement. Shawshank Redemption was absolutely not directed by M. Night Shyamalan. I'm not sure why I thought that. That movie was directed by Frank Darabont. So I just want a quick little correction. I don't know how long I talk about it for, but that's definitely a correction that needs to be made. It just goes to show that I need to watch that movie as soon as today. So, just wanted to throw in a little correction. Hope you're enjoying the episode. I gotta watch it and see if it follows in line with the same pattern, because I'm not really seeing a plot twist in this movie. It's very straightforward. They actually tell you everything that could happen, and as the time goes on, you sort of get a general idea for, this is what's happening, and this happened, and okay, it happened that way, and cool, now the movie's done. And that to me is, it's trying to be a mystery. It's not a mystery. They tell you straight up what's happening, and it's not one of those movies that does that in a clever way. I think that this movie is too predictable to a fault, and I think that as soon as you realize what's happening, which is pretty early in the movie, to be honest, I think you realize immediately what's going to happen, and that to me really takes away from any of the stakes and suspense, even though the stakes of the movie is that the world's going to end. So you either knew that the world was either A, going to end, or B, it wasn't. As soon as you saw that Eric, played by Jonathan Groff, was sort of conflicted and it was sort of being convinced by these people that this is the case, that the apocalypse really is coming, I think he immediately was like, yeah, I'm with it. And you knew that he was probably going to die. Spoilers, he does. Like, it's not that much of a plot twist. I would challenge that there's probably not a plot twist at all. Now, does there need to be? No, but the movie definitely feels like it's trying to make it seem like that, but you never feel like you're on the edge of your seat in this movie, and that to me is that's a huge knock pun on this movie. Now, two smaller details, and then that's it basically for this segment. One, I think that the idea behind the movie is actually quite interesting. I think that there was like a grasshopper in a jar. They tried to use that as some sort of a metaphor. I don't think that the metaphor was strong enough, but I think that the intent was there, which I appreciate. But I don't think that the metaphor really worked. I like, none of them were grasshoppers trapped in a jar. Like, you could maybe stretch it and like get to some sort of conclusion there. I wouldn't do that, because it's, if the metaphor isn't perfect, a lot of times metaphors just kind of fall flat and they just don't work. And in this case, it felt like a wasted shot to do the whole catching grasshoppers and putting them in a jar. Like, how does that compare to having to sacrifice one of your family members for the greater good? That, like, that and grasshoppers in a jar means nothing, you know? So that was an issue that I had, but I think that this is sort of a prisoner's dilemma aspect, and that was the part of the movie that I thought was actually very unique, which is basically this idea of you have three people who are being told one of the three of you has to be willing to sacrifice yourself. We are told the rules right out the gate. One of them has to be okay with sacrificing themselves, but they don't know if any of these four people are telling the truth. They can act all drastic and whatever that they want to, but at the end of the day, they won't know if it's true. So what were to happen if one of them sacrificed themselves and then, you know, quote unquote, the world was saved? They would never know if the world needed saving. They would have never known. Actually, one of the characters, Andrew, I'm blanking on the actor's name, so let's see if I can maybe take a quick cut here and figure out who played Daddy Andrew. Daddy Andrew was played by Ben Aldridge. Sorry about that, folks. Last episode there was a motorcycle, now there's an airplane. I can't catch a break. So, but yes, so Andrew had a very good point where he was like, how do we know that you're being legit? Like, like all of this information of a virus being out there and what was the other thing? Oh, and earthquakes happening. Like, this was all stuff that was already happening before they even arrived. This isn't proof that any of the things that they're saying are valid, which is it's interesting because it's like one side is trying to convince the other of something, but even if they believe them, it's like, how do you know that this will work? You don't. So it's sort of like, that's the prisoner's dilemma there. I don't know if it's an exact prisoner's dilemma, but I think it's an interesting concept of how do you convince someone to do something for the greater good if there's no way to prove that it is for the greater good? How do you know that they're not just going to sacrifice themselves and then nothing will happen? Because then at that point, you're sacrificing someone for no reason. So it's a very interesting. I like that. But I think that the lack of proof from the Harbingers I think it kind of ruined it a little bit for me. They didn't give them a lot of reason to believe that was happening until the very end. And even then, it felt like a little bit of a stretch. Because again, how do you know that it's going to work? And they're just kind of saying, oh, I saw a figure in the light. Like, okay, all right. That feels like a cop-out because we, the audience, did not see that figure. So that for me, when Eric was using that as his motif behind, oh, I'm going to sacrifice myself because I saw a figure in the light, the audience didn't see or at least I didn't. Maybe I looked down while I was taking notes and it was there for a second, but I feel like if that was the case, that should have been like a much bigger thing, because they're fleshing out these two fathers, and I thought, and I'll end the segment with this, I think there was a missed opportunity, because I've studied, in grade school, I studied the Bible, a wee bit. And so if you're familiar with the story of Abraham and Isaac at the top of Mount Sinai, where he was going to sacrifice Isaac, basically. And then an angel came down and said, no, you've proven that you are faithful, blah, blah, blah. That story from the Bible, I thought was where they actually could go with this, because you had these two fathers and then you had their adopted daughter. I thought that because their whole thing is like, it's always been you and me. It's like, we'll be together and on this. And they kept saying that over and over again. And I was thinking, like, you two will be together. Are you including your daughter in that? And sure, like, they were, sort of. But it's like, that to me felt like a weird way to go about that. I felt like it was a missed opportunity. If the two of them kept saying that, maybe they said, okay, we're going to sacrifice our daughter. And the whole movie, they're convincing the daughter that this is a good idea. And then they go to sacrifice her. And then maybe Leonard does something to save her or something. I don't know. I don't know exactly how it would go down. I feel like it was a weird choice to randomly have Eric be the one to sacrifice himself. I didn't quite understand why that was the case. I didn't really get it. Maybe that's on me. maybe I should be paying more attention to these types of things, but I didn't understand that choice. So I think all in all, is this movie gonna win any Oscars? I genuinely don't think so. Do I think it's a bad movie? No, I don't. But I think that it is movies like this that have these unique concepts, but they're not quite done correctly. We talked about that a little bit with The Sound of Freedom. I'm seeing this more and more, where there's a movie that has a really fun and cool concept, but the boundaries of like what can be pushed and like the lines that could be crossed for some of these, I don't know if that's the best phrasing, but I think that there are better ways to go about this type of storytelling, if that makes sense. So I'm going to end it there. I think that this movie had a lot of potential, giving it a 6.4. And I'm curious what other movies of this type of genre come out, because I would like more tension. It didn't feel like there was a lot of tension. You never felt throughout the entire thing that there was any reason for the three of these, the daughter or the two dads, you never felt a reason for them to betray each other. And they didn't. At the very end, they didn't betray each other. And it's a unique spin on this hostage type of thing where it's like, oh, you have to make a decision. I've seen different movies where they put characters in this sort of position, but each character has a little bit of dirt on each other, so there's a lot more conflict. I think that would have been more riveting, and it just goes to show that doing that for this type of story is a little bit more effective, because this movie lacked the tension needed for it to really work, in my opinion. Let me know if you agree or disagree. And yeah, I mean, that's sort of like I said, we're going improv style. So in the following segment, right when we get back, we're going to talk about actors who play morally ambiguous characters like the characters in this movie. So if you're interested in that, you're not going to want to go far. So stay tuned for more. Which movies do you want mentioned on the Oscar Watch? Let us know on Instagram at _cinema_spotlight, and drop a follow while you're there to get updates, behind the scenes details, and to participate in polls following each episode. Now, let's get back to the show. Welcome back. We are going to have some fun here. And for this middle segment, as I've talked about in the past, I'm going to be going more on something that I realized, or maybe something I'm really passionate about, and just go on a short little rant. I love... Actually, wait, hold on. Let me hold that thought. Let me say the line. So I was thinking, I love characters in movies who are morally ambiguous. They're not good guys, but they're not bad guys. Here's an example. One of the biggest examples of this. Walter White. Is he a villain? Technically not, because he's the protagonist of the story, but he's the protagonist, so like we're seeing the story through his lens, which makes him a protagonist to us, but really a lot of his stuff makes him a villain, so he's sort of an anti-hero. That type of character is what I'm talking about today. And there are a few actors that I would love to shout out that portray these types of characters very well. Number 1, Paul Dano. Paul Dano is very good at being a soft-spoken character, but he's done some roles where he's portrayed the Riddler. He's portrayed, I don't remember the character's name, but he was in Prisoners, and a very, very good performance from him. He was, in that movie, a kidnap victim who we thought was probably the culprit that had kidnapped the other little girl, but he ended up being innocent at the end of the story. So Paul Dano is one of these actors that does a very good job being able to play off just being like, you feel bad for him, but also it's like, I don't know, he could be either. He could be good, he could be bad. It's we're not really sure with a lot of his characters. In The Fabelmans, I'll say that his character as, I guess, Steven Spielberg's father in that movie, there were instances where it definitely wasn't his fault, and I think they definitely throw it onto the mother. I think that there were parts of that where, in my opinion at least, we're not really sure whether or not we're supposed to like the dad or not. I think if you do or you don't, I think that's completely subjective. But yeah, I think Paul Dano is one of those actors that does a great job. Now, what else do I like about morally ambiguous characters? I like that it makes the story a little bit more, not intelligent, I don't want to say that, but it creates this dynamic with the characters where they're harder to predict in the story because they're being self-interested. There are a lot of heroes in plot where, in general movie plots, where they are always going to be a doer for good, if that makes sense. They are going to be someone who represents good and purity and innocence and just being a hero and helping those in need. Those are boring at times, to be honest. And there are some villains who, granted, villains, I stand by, can make or break a movie with how good they are. Some just being malicious, some you can be empathetic with because their motive makes a little bit more sense. But someone who's in the middle is almost just like a great... It's almost just a villain that you really empathize with. So one that I think stands out to me of recent memory is Namor in Wakanda Forever. And Namor in that movie, like, you understood his motive. Like, sure, maybe he was doing some villainous things, but like everything that he was doing, you were like, yeah, I mean, that makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. And you're just saying that over and over again because it does. Like, all of what he's doing just completely makes sense for his character. And if you were in his shoes, you'd be like, yeah, I might do the same. So these types of characters, for me, are the most interesting because they are their own team. They are not good. They are not bad. They are them. And characters like that, you don't see a lot. And whenever they come up, maybe this is just me, they tend to be my favorite. So, for example, we just talked about Knock at the Cabin. The characters that were played by, let's see, I can actually credit them properly right now. The four horsemen that showed up. Dave Bautista, Ben Aldridge. Actually, Ben Aldridge played Andrew. He was not one of the horsemen. Rupert Grint, who played Redman. Abby Quinn, who played Adrian. And then there was... Oh, I'm missing someone here. Nikki Amuka Bird. These four horsemen, they come into frame, and you're a little uneasy, but then you start to see how human they are, and you really genuinely feel bad for them, and you almost feel bad for them more than the people at the cabin, but you equally feel bad for all of them, because there's no villains there, but there's people in opposition. Now, does opposition always mean good versus evil? No, and this movie does a good job of demonstrating that. How there's people on one side and people on the other. They are in opposition due to circumstantial opposition. I'll pretend that that's a term. I just made it up myself. But I think it's a really fun choice to make, and I think that we don't see that all the time in cinema. How there are two opposing sides, and neither is fighting for good or bad. They are fighting for themselves. And I think another example of this, I'll use another MCU example because it's easier just to demonstrate it with superheroes and supervillains. In Captain America: Civil War, the war, I guess, or the debate between Tony and Captain America on whether or not to sign the accord of revealing the ins and outs. I'm not going to get too into it, but in that, you definitely see from both sides the argument. And I think characters like that, where they're sitting in the middle, are just so fascinating. And this segment is just dedicated to me realizing something about cinema that I'm just really a fan of, and sharing that and expressing that opinion. And maybe some of you out there will say, you know what, I hadn't been able to voice it, but yeah, you know what, there are characters who are morally ambiguous that I think are really entertaining. Another great example of this is in one of my favorite movies of all time, Mystic River. Tim Robbins gives an amazing performance. Just an amazing, gut-wrenching performance in that movie. and you really feel bad for him because everyone, the entire movie, is suspicious of him being the one who was bad. But he wasn't. He wasn't. But you don't know that until the very end of the movie. You have no reason. I mean, you have reason to believe that maybe he did something bad, but he didn't. And he ends up dying in that movie as a result. And I think when you're dealing with actors like that who are so good at playing the sinister, but also, I mean, I won't give credit to that actor, but there's a specific actor who comes to mind that was also good at that in his performances, but I'm not going to give credit because he did some bad stuff in real life, and I'm not going to do that. So, yeah, I mean, I think if we're talking characters who are morally ambiguous, I think it just makes for a more dynamic story. So that could be in a murder mystery. That could be in a horror film. That could be superhero genre, absolutely. Action, you're going to see that a lot. This also you could see in something like a rom-com. If a couple is bickering, but you kind of understand both sides of that argument of what's going on, then that's morally ambiguous. Like, maybe, because at that point it's like, when I say morally ambiguous, I'm not talking about like, well, you're not sure if they're good or bad, because in essence that is what I mean, but in certain situations that almost extends to this idea of you're not right or wrong, you are justified in your way of thinking, in your position in whatever the scenario is. And I think that in a rom-com that or could be just any romance movie, really, there is every possibility that something like that might come up. So me personally, I think it's super fun that something like some sort of morally ambiguous characters can exist in cinema, because then we can talk about that. And they're way more fun to talk about than someone who you know where they stand, you know why they're standing there. And more often than not, they're doing it for the sake of the plot of the movie. But I love those little side characters and supporting characters, sometimes main characters, that have their time to shine, where they're like, you know what, I'm in the middle here. And I personally think, this is my plea to Hollywood, we need more characters like that. Let's not overdo it, because there are ways you can do it bad. I think you can do it where just some jerk that's trying to play devil's advocate, which is like not exactly what I'm talking about. And granted, there's nothing wrong with playing devil's advocate, but I could definitely see a world where like there will be a movie that's released and there's someone that's playing devil's advocate basically, and they are considered quote unquote morally ambiguous because they're just like saying, oh, well, to play devil's advocate. I think that that's not the right way to do it. I think that there's genuine ways to really flesh out characters and have them be conflicted in that way, because self versus self is probably my favorite type of conflict. The type of conflict that goes on solely in an individual's head and it affects their decision making. And when you see that play out in cinema, that is just an absolute work of art. Now, we talked about Dave Bautista in the first segment. In the second segment, there's definitely a connection here as we go on to our third and final segment. So we will be right back. Don't go away. If you are enjoying the show so far, please remember to check out the episode playlist on Spotify. Also, leave a rating and subscribe so that you don't miss future episodes. Wouldn't that be a shame? Break time's over. Time for the final part of the show. Welcome back to the third and final segment of this episode. And here's the thing. We did a Q&A last week, and there were a couple questions I needed to cut, just for sake of time. There was one that I did have an interesting answer to it, and I thought it was actually a fun question. So, to whoever listened to the episode and was like, oh, my question got cut. Well, possibly, here it is. The question, which I don't have in front of me because I am improvising, but this question, I promise, did exist. Is there an actor that we're seeing a lot of right now that you are sick of seeing? And I do have an answer for that. I want to sort of connect it to the idea of a superstar in Hollywood and having just what does that mean? Like, what does it mean to be a superstar? So I want to take it all the way back to Marilyn Monroe, who was essentially the 7-year itch was like a big thing, and men would go and they would see a Marilyn Monroe movie, and that was their escape. And I mean, you can question whether or not that's like a positive or negative thing. It definitely worked out in some ways for Hollywood, because they were like, we know how to make money off of this, so they were just going to keep doing it anyways. But Marilyn Monroe was so iconic. She was such an icon, to the point where I would go on a limb and say there's not a lot of people that measure up to her presence on screen. I don't know if her acting was like particularly amazing, but that's not the point. The point is she had such a level of star power where she would be in a movie and no one would they would go to the theater, not even know the movie's name. All they would say is, I want to see the Marilyn Monroe movie. That's what I want to do. I want to see the Marilyn Monroe movie, and the person at the booth would know exactly what they were talking about. That's what they would go and do. And you don't see a lot of that now. You really don't. I think the closest we come to, maybe Leonardo DiCaprio. I think if he's in a movie, people trust at this point that it's going to be at least a decent movie. I don't think I can remember the last time Leo was a starring or was a lead role in a movie that wasn't at least decent. People didn't really love Don't Look Up that much, but the movie was it was decent. It was like okay. Like there's no movie that he's done that was bad. So I think but the thing is, I don't think that there's a lot of people that go to the movie theater. Maybe I'm wrong about this, but I don't believe that there's people that go to the movie theater whenever there's a Leonardo DiCaprio movie and say, I want to see the Leo movie. No, I don't think so. I don't think anyone, like, I'm trying to think of like these icons in like where I would rank them, right? So I think number 1 is Marilyn Monroe. Genuinely, I think she is the biggest star to ever exist. Genuinely, at this point, I think in the same stretch, like the same category, I think you can go ahead and put someone like Michael Jackson. I think you can go ahead and put someone like Elvis. I think genuinely, I think maybe Beyonce, and I think maybe Taylor Swift at this point. And there's one that I think is making the push to become this, and this is actually my answer to the question of who do you think is in Hollywood a little bit too much. And my answer personally is Dwayne Johnson. And here's why. Because I don't think his acting is particularly bad. I don't think it's particularly good either. I don't think his range is that great. I think he can be comedic. I think he mostly stars in action roles. And I think that Dwayne Johnson, his name is big enough where I think he's able to make stuff happen. And I think that he can draw in an audience alone. But I think that, personally, I don't get any value from going to his movies because it's almost like the opposite of Leo, where I gotta be on, and this is gonna sound really harsh, but I do have some good things to say afterwards. I think that Dwayne Johnson, if it's a Dwayne Johnson movie, unfortunately, he has a reputation of being in bad action movies. I think that there are some good ones sprinkled in, but for the most part, like, nothing that he's done, like, I don't go to see his movies in the movie theater because I'm never expecting it to be anything super amazing. And like, if you like superhero movies and you like just like mindless action movies, yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like, if that's your genre that you like, if you really enjoy that, power to you. Absolutely, there's a movie for everyone out there. If his movies are for you, awesome, love that, because they're just not for me. But the reason why I want to talk about Dave Bautista is because we're noticing this flux of WWE wrestlers coming and doing things in Hollywood. So There's three main ones that come to mind. Obviously, Dwayne Johnson is one. Two is Dave Bautista. And I actually think Dave Bautista is doing a great job of really diversifying the type of characters that he plays as. But the third option is John Cena. I would say John Cena is, actually, of the three of them, John Cena nails the comedy the best. Which I know could be a hot take, I don't know. But I think John Cena's comedy is the best. I think that action-wise, I think Dwayne Johnson's probably the best. And I think that, to be honest, the best actor of the three, for me, it's a landslide Dave Bautista. Easily. I think that what we were able to see from Knock at the Cabin is Dave Bautista taking a role where he's not just yelling and screaming or he's not firing guns all the time, or when he's portraying Drax, just sort of being a mindless idiot that says like a funny joke here or there. No, in this movie, he's very serious, very somber. You genuinely feel for him. And there's a moment where he gets in a tussle with one of the characters, and you're almost like a little bit rooting for him, because you understand that he's not necessarily, you're not rooting for him, but it's a situation where like they're fighting and they're brawling, and he's literally like brushing himself off like, oh my god, I can't believe I just did that. Even despite being such a masculine presence. And it got a smirk from me, because I think that the idea of it is kind of funny, of like this intimidating guy kind of being like, oh, I've never been in a fight before. But his character in there is a guidance. It's supposed to be like a guide, and he's a elementary school teacher, and he talks about the kids that he teaches, and you see this really, really soft side of him in this movie, and he portrays it, and he speaks so eloquently in that. And I think that he just does such a good job. So, where am I going with this? I don't know. I don't really... Well, okay. Let's say this. We're talking about superstars. Do I think that Dave Bautista could be a superstar? I think that there's a world where maybe. But I think when you're looking for who is a superstar, I think it's genuinely they do one thing perfectly. Marilyn Monroe did what she did perfectly. Does Dwayne Johnson? No, I don't think so. I think in order for him to be doing something perfectly, I think he's definitely an icon, for sure, and he definitely has a presence in his movies. But I almost feel like, yes, the movies are made to be based around him. I think that we are living in a day and age where the movie that you're in and the movie that you're watching actually does matter to the person. Back in the day, that didn't really happen. People didn't really care what movie they were seeing as long as it had Marilyn Monroe in it. Imagine, if you're an actor listening to this, imagine what that must be like. Being so famous, so beloved, that anything you did, people would watch because you did it, not because of how good the project actually is. That, to me, screams superstar. And does Dwayne Johnson scream that? I don't know about that. I think you watch it and you're kind of like, all right, this movie wasn't that great, but I like Dwayne Johnson, so it's fine. Do you really want to go watching a movie of someone like that and saying like, it's fine? No, I don't think so. So this did sort of end up turning into a little bit of a rant here, which I don't know. I don't know if that's a good or bad thing. Maybe it's morally ambiguous, but yeah, I mean, I think it's a very interesting question to ask, because I think in the modern day, what happens is Hollywood is such a machine where you do see some of the same people over and over and over again. The difference is the medium in which you're able to see these people over and over again. If you see Dwayne Johnson over and over again, consistently, in subpar movies, that to me is, it makes him look bad. Despite the fact that, and again, I said I was going to say some nice things, I actually think he has tons of potential. Do I think he has crazy range? I'm going to say this. We haven't seen it, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I think that genuinely he could maybe do what Dave Bautista has been able to do and take roles where it tests him a little bit more. He's just doing mindless action movies, and I think that that's my issue with him, is that he has so much potential. We've seen him sing and be Maui in Moana. But here's the thing about that, is Maui really just was an animated version of Dwayne Johnson, minus the singing. But I think that if we see more of that fun, bubbly aspect of him, which does exist in a couple movies. There are some movies that he's done where he is just a comedic character, and I think he can do that, but I would love to see an emotional side of him. We haven't really seen that. We've seen very, very surface level emotion from him in his performances, and I would love to see more, and I'm super, super curious if in the next couple of years, maybe he does something where he's pushing his range a little bit. That is something that really would bring me to the movie theater. Now, that's all I got. So, I think we're gonna take this opportunity to go. Yeah, let's just head on over to the outro. Just grab my arm and we'll mosey on over there. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Cinema Spotlight. We had a little bit of a lightning round today, so I hope you all enjoyed. And like I said in the intro, expect some guests coming soon. I'm in a little bit of a transitional period with, new work schedule, new routine, trying to figure out when's the best time to record. I'm still working on all of that and piecing all that together, so please bear with me in the meantime, but I hope you still enjoyed the episode. Please leave a like on the video if you did enjoy, and if you could take a moment to subscribe to the show on whichever platform you're listening on, I would greatly appreciate it. Be sure to follow our official Instagram at _cinema_spotlight for updates on when new episodes get released. I'll go ahead and shut the spotlight off for now. Until next time, stay classy, friends.